In the small, sleepy town of Millfield, where life moved slowly and neighbors knew one another by name, nothing ever seemed out of place. The houses stood in neat rows, the lawns were always trimmed, and children played in the parks without fear. But on a cold, rainy Monday morning, the peaceful town was shaken to its core when a 911 call came from a concerned neighbor living on Pine Street. She reported a strange, foul odor coming from the little blue house at the end of the road. It was the home of Catherine Myers, a 34-year-old single mother known in the neighborhood for being quiet, polite, and fiercely protective of her two children, 6-year-old Lena and 4-year-old James. When officers arrived, the sky was still gray, and a drizzle coated the pavement in a steady mist. The blue house stood quiet, almost too quiet. Its windows were fogged, and the mailbox overflowed with unread letters. Something felt wrong. As the officers approached, they noticed the front door wasn't shut completely. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry or had never returned at all. With weapons drawn and gloves on, the police stepped inside. The first thing they noticed was the silence. No television, no voices, just the sound of dripping water and the faint creak of the wooden floorboards. The living room was in disarray. The couch was overturned, a lamp lay shattered on the floor, and dark red stains were splattered on the walls and soaked into the carpet. Family photographs had fallen from the wall, their glass frames cracked. The sight painted a picture of sudden, intense violence. There were signs of a struggle, chairs knocked over, a trail of broken glass, and smeared handprints on the walls. Yet no bodies, no movement, and no cries for help. As they moved through the kitchen, the sense of dread deepened. The table was set for breakfast. 2 cereal bowls had gone stale. Milk had spoiled and curdled. The fridge door hung open slightly, as if someone had been interrupted. But it was the floor that drew their attention, a set of small, bloody footprints. They were too small to be an adult's. They trailed across the tile floor and led straight to the basement door, which was closed tight. The officers exchanged a glance. One reached for the handle, heart pounding. As the basement door creaked open, the air changed. The smell grew worse, thicker, almost unbearable. The stairs creaked as they descended. At the bottom, in the dim light, lay a figure wrapped tightly in a blood-soaked blanket. It was Catherine Myers. Her body was bruised and battered. There were signs of blunt force trauma, and her face was barely recognizable. Around her were scattered toys, a small pink sock, and a stuffed rabbit missing one eye. But the children, Lena and James, were gone. The nightmare had only just begun. The blue house, once filled with laughter and bedtime stories, had become a crime scene. Detectives were called in, and the search for 2 missing children and the monster behind the carnage had started. The town of Millfield would never be the same again. Crime scene investigators worked through the night inside the Myers home, carefully documenting every detail, every stain, and every broken item that hinted at the horror that had taken place. Catherine's lifeless body, discovered in the basement, had suffered extensive trauma. Her arms showed signs of defensive wounds, suggesting she had fought back desperately. The brutality of the attack was unlike anything local officers had ever encountered. But what disturbed them even more was the absence of the 2 children, Lena and James. Their beds upstairs were untouched, as if they had gone to sleep expecting a normal night. Their favorite toys still lay on the shelves, and their pajamas were folded neatly under their pillows. Yet, blood evidence indicated they had not escaped unharmed. Forensic teams found smears of blood in the hallway, bathroom, and along the staircase. Multiple blood types were confirmed, including one belonging to a child. In the kitchen trash bin, a torn piece of fabric stained with blood was discovered, appearing to match James's pajamas. On the dining table, officers found something that sent shivers down their spines. A crayon drawing of a tall, faceless man, scrawled in red and black. Next to it was a broken box of crayons, and beneath the paper was a second drawing, even more disturbing. It depicted a woman, presumably Catherine, lying in what appeared to be a pool of red, while two small figures, one larger than the other, stood nearby with tears drawn on their faces. The most chilling discovery came from a narrow closet under the basement stairs. Inside, police found a battered notebook filled with dozens of childlike sketches. The pages were torn and dirty, but the drawings all seemed to tell a terrifying story. Each one showed violent scenes, people screaming, a figure holding a knife, houses burning, and children hiding behind trees. One page was covered entirely in black scribbles, with a caption in shaky handwriting that simply read, "He watches us." The immediate question was, who was he? Detectives began interviewing neighbors, hoping someone had seen or heard anything. One elderly neighbor mentioned hearing loud thuds and what sounded like a child crying 2 nights before the discovery. She had assumed it was just the children playing. Another neighbor recalled seeing a man walking down the street late at night wearing a dark hoodie, but they couldn't provide a clear description. The security camera at a nearby gas station had a partial view of the road, but the footage was too grainy to identify anyone. Meanwhile, the community was in shock. Flyers with the children's faces were distributed, and a statewide Amber Alert was issued. Volunteers formed search parties, scouring the woods, alleys, and abandoned buildings. But each passing hour made hope harder to hold on to. The clues were horrifying, but they didn't point to a clear suspect. The only certainty was that someone had entered that house with unimaginable rage and had taken 2 innocent children away from their mother, forever altering the course of their lives. 2. Days after the discovery of Catherine's body, the investigation took a dramatic turn. A park ranger conducting a routine check in the dense expanse of Black Ridge Forest came across something odd. A child's shoe lying near a trail, half buried in mud. It was pink, small, and decorated with faded cartoon characters. The ranger immediately contacted the authorities. When detectives arrived, they confirmed it matched the exact pair Lena had been wearing in a photo taken just a week before. That shoe sparked a massive search operation that would soon uncover a shocking revelation. Search dogs were brought in, and officers spread out across the heavily wooded area. The weather had turned colder, the rain hadn't stopped, and time was slipping away. Every second mattered. Then, just before dusk, one of the K9 units began barking near a thick patch of undergrowth beside a fallen tree. There, curled into a ball beneath a moss-covered trunk, was Lena. Her clothes were soaked, her face was scratched, and her lips trembled from cold and fear. But she was alive. Paramedics rushed her to safety, wrapping her in blankets and checking her for injuries. She was malnourished, dehydrated, and nearly unresponsive. For hours she sat in silence, staring at nothing. Slowly, with the help of trauma specialists, Lena began to speak, softly, carefully, and in broken pieces. What she said sent shockwaves through the team of investigators working the case. Lena told them that a man had come into the house while they were sleeping. He had hurt their mother and dragged the children away in the dark. He wore a black hoodie and gloves and said very little. Lena remembered being taken to a cabin or shack somewhere in the woods. She had no idea where it was, but she remembered trees, smoke, and the sound of animals at night. She said James had cried a lot, and the man had yelled at him to be quiet. Lena didn't know how long they had been there, but at some point when the man fell asleep, she had managed to slip away and run. She had wandered for what felt like hours, hiding from every sound, before crawling under the tree where she was eventually found. Her story confirmed that James was still alive, but in the hands of someone dangerous. Detectives began combing through all records of cabins, hunting shacks, or any abandoned structures in the vicinity of Blackridge Forest. They also released a composite sketch of the man based on Lena's description. No facial details could be included. She had only ever seen his shadowy figure and the hoodie covering his face. But the height, build, and clothing were described in detail. The search intensified. Roadblocks were set up around the forest's perimeter. Drones scanned the tree canopy, and officers moved through the woods methodically. But the terrain was vast and unforgiving. Each hour that passed without finding James felt like a clock ticking toward an irreversible end. The hope of rescuing him alive was slipping away, and no one could shake the feeling that the faceless figure Lena described might not just be a random intruder, but someone with a much deeper connection to the Myers family. The results from the DNA analysis came back faster than expected, and what they revealed turned the entire investigation on its head. The skin cells found under Catherine's fingernails matched a man named Daniel Ward, a name that had never come up in earlier interviews or background checks. At first glance, Daniel appeared to be a ghost. No current address, no job records, and no digital footprint for nearly 6 years. But once detectives dug deeper, a disturbing history began to emerge. Years ago, Daniel had been in a brief relationship with Catherine Myers. At the time, he had worked as a delivery driver and lived 2 towns over. There was no official record of abuse, but Catherine had confided in a close friend that the relationship ended badly. She described Daniel as obsessive and unpredictable. After they broke up, Catherine had reportedly moved to Millfield to start over, never mentioning Daniel again, not even to family. What no one knew was that Daniel hadn't simply disappeared. He had been watching from a distance. Police followed the trail to an old property on the outskirts of Blackridge Forest, once owned by Daniel's uncle. Though the cabin had been abandoned for years, a neighbor mentioned seeing smoke coming from the chimney just days earlier. When investigators arrived, they found clear signs someone had been living there. Burned-out candles, fast food wrappers, and a moldy mattress on the floor. But the cabin was empty. In a drawer, detectives found a photograph that stopped them. Cold. It showed Catherine holding a baby, standing next to Daniel, smiling. Scrawled on the back were 4 chilling words. "He's my son, too." That discovery changed everything. Detectives now believed Daniel had discovered that James was his biological child, something Catherine had kept secret. Motive, opportunity, and rage had collided. The theory was that Daniel had been following Catherine for weeks, possibly longer, and had finally snapped after confirming the truth. Now the focus shifted from finding a random suspect to hunting down a calculated predator who knew how to stay hidden. Police tracked purchases made under Daniel's alias and discovered a recent transaction at a rural gas station. Surveillance footage showed a man in a black hoodie buying supplies and fuel, with what looked like a small child waiting in the passenger seat of an old pickup truck. Though the image was blurry, the timeline fit. The vehicle was traced to a junkyard where Daniel had worked years ago. From there, they followed a string of clues: abandoned campsites, footprints in the mud, even torn pieces of children's clothing caught on tree branches. The manhunt spread across 3 counties, Tension grew with each passing day. The press dubbed Daniel the Shadow Father, and every news channel carried updates about the missing boy, James. Community members left toys and candles outside, the Myers house in silent protest of the horror that had unfolded. Police were now working against time. Daniel wasn't just on the run. He had a child with him, and no one knew what he was capable of doing next. After 6 agonizing days on the run, Daniel Ward was finally located deep within the remote outskirts of Gray Hollow, a forgotten patch of forest land nearly 30 miles from Millfield. A hunter had reported seeing smoke rising from an abandoned trailer parked far off a dirt path, surrounded by thorny brush and rusted scrap metal. When officers arrived at the scene, they approached cautiously, fearing that any wrong move might provoke Daniel into harming the boy. A drone hovered silently above, confirming movement inside the trailer, a single adult and a small child. A tactical team moved in at dawn, surrounding the trailer with precision. There was no negotiation. They stormed the structure in seconds. Inside, they found Daniel crouched in a corner, holding James tightly in his arms. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The child was pale, thin, and shivering, but alive. He had bruises on his arms and legs, and his lips were dry and cracked. Wrapped in an oversized jacket, James was immediately carried out by paramedics and rushed to the hospital. For the first time in nearly a week, the community exhaled in relief. Daniel was arrested on multiple charges, including kidnapping, murder, and child endangerment. During interrogation, he remained mostly silent, offering no apologies, no explanations. But investigators believed that Catherine's murder had been planned. The drawings, the stalking, and the brutal nature of the attack all pointed to a calculated and obsessive mindset. Catherine had kept James's paternity a secret, likely out of fear. But Daniel had uncovered the truth. And instead of seeking custody through legal means, he had chosen violence and abduction. James, though too young to fully understand what had happened, slowly began to speak with child psychologists. He remembered being woken up in the night. He remembered his mother screaming. He remembered being told not to cry. In the trailer, Daniel had told him they were going to start over, that his mother was gone for a reason. The emotional damage was deep, but he was safe now, reunited with Lena, who clung to him tightly when they finally met again at the hospital. The town of Millfield held a candlelight vigil for Catherine Myers. Hundreds of people gathered in silence, laying flowers and stuffed animals on the front porch of the little blue house on Pine Street. Her story had gripped the nation. A mother who died protecting her children from a past she thought she had left behind. The house was eventually boarded up, but the memories of what had happened inside would never fade. Daniel was declared mentally fit to stand trial. In court, photos of Catherine's injuries, Lena's drawings, and James's hospital report painted a haunting picture. The jury took less than 2 hours to find him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lena and James were placed in the care of their maternal aunt, who promised to raise them in a home filled with love and safety. Though the scars would remain, the siblings had survived something unimaginable. And as the seasons changed, in Millfield, their story became a reminder of both the darkness people can carry and the unbreakable strength of a mother's love.